So this chapter is about text, basically about incorporating and showing text in the 3D scene. And a word of caution, I think it's important right at the beginning. So controlling text in A-frame is kind of hard. And particularly if you are used to working with HTML, for example, it's very limited. So in HTML, we have lots of functions to lay out text in a web page. In A-frame, we are much more limited in what we can do. In addition, the documentation for the text component in A-frame is not very complete. So you might have some trouble if you try to do a very specific thing. It might not be easy, and the documentation may not help you, at least the current state of the documentation. My advice is to ask for help if you are unable to do something that you feel should be doable in A-frame. So just ask me for help if you are not able to do something. Basically what we will want to do is something like in this very simple scene here, where we have, in this case, we have a box, and in addition to the box, we have some lines of text. And as you can see, so the text changes perspective, so it's actually, the text itself is bidimensional, but it is positioned in 3D space. Like other objects, if you go around the text, you stop seeing it. So text can only be seen from one of the sides, but we'll see how to change that. So how do we add lines of text in a scene? Well, basically, we use another primitive, the A-text primitive. And it basically works like any other 3D object. So we can position it anywhere in the 3D scene, in 3D space. And the way we tell this primitive what the content of the text should be, what exact words should be, is by using the value attribute. So we add an attribute called value, and then we just write the sentence as the content of that attribute. In a minute, I will talk about other attributes. For example, you can see right now in this example that there's a third attribute here in this primitive, which is called align. And this is used, well, for aligning the text, and we will cover that in a minute. So one of the things I told you that text can only be seen from one side. And this is a picture for the first example, but from behind, and you don't see any text here. And that, again, that happens because we are on the wrong side of the text. So it can only, by default, it can only be seen from one side. We can control that, however. So in some situations, it may be important for the user to see text from both sides, or in some situations even it might be important just to show the text from the back instead of from the default, which is the front. We can control that with the side attribute, and this actually works for other primitives, not just text. So this is the way we have in A-frame to control which side of the object is visible. So if we want, this is the default, side equals front. We can change it to back, and in that case the text would only be seen from the back. Or if you want text to be seen from both sides, we write double. So side equals double would show the text from both sides. So for example, here in this second example, I'm going to move to the back, and you see there that the first line can only be seen from the front. When I move to the back, it disappears. There's a line that's initially invisible here because the text has a side back value, so it's only seen from the back, and it's only seen from the back, and because we are on the back, the text is unreadable. It's like seeing a piece of vinyl on a window from the other side, so we would have to read it backwards. And the third line, so the one on the bottom, can be seen from both sides. So it has an attribute side equals double. I'll show you here the source code. So just an example to show the three possible values: side front, side back, side double. We can also write multiple lines of text if we need to. So text doesn't need to have a single line as in the previous examples. And the way to do that is kind of unnatural, but it's the way it works. So basically, to create several lines of text, we need to write in the value, we need to write these special characters. This /n, this means new line. Okay, so it will write the second part of the text in a line below the first one. And we can actually write several /n characters and create multiple lines. So in this example here, you see that we have these multiple lines of text, and I'll show you the source. They're actually created by just two A-text primitives. So both primitives are actually writing several lines. So here you see, for example, the /n that I was mentioned, so the first line, and another for the second and third lines. You'll also see that A-frame will, in some cases, it will automatically wrap the text, so it will automatically create new lines. And we kind of can control that. So if our text is very long, it will automatically break the text into several lines. And usually we don't really want that, and we want to break each line of text in a particular location. And for that case, we have this /n. If we are okay with the automatic line breaking, then we can just go with that. The default, by the way, this is not very accurate, very strict, because it doesn't depend only on the number of characters. But by default, A-frame will break lines of text automatically at around 40 characters, more or less. So this is not exact. And we can, if we don't like that automatic line breaking, if you don't like that threshold, we can actually use this attribute wrap count, which will control how many characters will appear in each line before A-frame starts breaking the text automatically. However, and this is one of the reasons why it's sometimes difficult to lay out text in A-frame, is that by changing the wrap count, we are also changing automatically the width, the size of the text as it appears. So we usually have to change two attributes when we change the wrap count. We need to change the wrap count, and then we need to change the width. Otherwise, the width, if we just change the wrap count, the width will also change automatically by A-frame. So there are a number of interactions between different attributes for controlling the text. But here, for example, you see that on the top we have the default line breaking for A-frame, and at the bottom we controlled the number of characters for each line with wrap count. And you notice that the text is roughly the same size. So we changed the width also to make sure that it would be roughly the same size. So here you see that the text on the top was just default. So we are not controlling any line breaking. And for the bottom one, we are saying to A-frame to create new lines roughly at around 20 characters. But we must also change the width of the text. Otherwise, it would be. I can, if I can log in into Glitch right now, I may be able to show you the difference. Let me try again. If not, then you'll have to check it out later. The difference between having a width or not having a width. No, I guess not. No luck yet. Okay, if you are able to, if you are logged in into Glitch, you may want to open up this example and just remove the width attribute and see the difference. See what using just wrap count does to the relative size of the text. Okay. Another thing that we usually want to do is to align text. And so you see here in the previous examples, the text is left aligned. So all lines of text, they start at the same position on the left side. But we can change this. So roughly as we can in any text editor. So we can align text to the left, to the center, or to the right. And this is done with the align attribute. So in this example, moving back so that we can see the whole text, we see here at the top the default, so left aligned. If we change that to align center, we have something like this here in the middle. And if we change it to align right, then we have right aligned text. Let me show you the source and point you out to a particular aspect which is important to know about. So if you notice here the position, so we have three text primitives in this scene, and if you notice the position of each piece of text, you will see that on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis, they are all on the same location. So they're all at x equals 0. The only thing that changes is the vertical position. Okay, so it's the position on the y-axis. However, notice that the text, as it appears in the scene, is actually at very different locations on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis. So why is this So even though we have positioned all three pieces of text in the same X position, they appear very differently. Why does this happen? Well, because A-frame automatically adjusts the reference point for the text as we change the way it is aligned. So let me explain this a bit better. If we align text to the left, as it is the default, then the reference point for positioning text will be the left side of the text. If we align text to the center, the reference point for positioning the text will be the center of the text. If we align to the right, the reference point will be the right side of the text. So if you notice, this vertical line here is actually passing through the various reference points. So the left side of the first text, the middle of the center text, and the right side of the bottom text, because we have changed, by changing the align attribute, we have also changed the reference point for positioning text. This is also important to know because it alters kind of the math that we have to do to position a given piece of text. If we don't like that, so let's say we have a center text, but we don't want to position the text in the scene by its center. We want to position the text by another reference point. We can actually change that. So we can use another attribute to allow us to do that. So we can use the align anchor. So in this case, for example, you see that we have text aligned, like in the previous example, left aligned, center aligned, and right aligned. But the reference point is different. It's not very easy to see here because the alignment of the text will cause empty space to appear in some lines. And so we can't exactly see where it is being aligned by. But I'll show you the source code and explain what's happening. So what we have changed from the previous example is that we added the anchor attribute. So the anchor is actually that reference point I was talking about. And in all three, we have anchored the text. So we have defined the reference point for positioning the text to be the right side of the text. So in this example, it's not easy to see on the top and middle text, but actually the right side of all three texts is aligned, and it said x equals 0. It's not easy to see again because we have some empty space. So the lines, they break at the level of the word. So a line doesn't break in the middle of a word. And so that makes A-frame add some empty space to fill the rest of the line. But actually, the reference is this vertical line that I'm kind of drawing with my mouse right here. So this is, don't worry too much about this. So this is a very fine control of text positioning, but in some situations we will need to do this. But the default is kind of sensible. The default makes sense. So usually, if we right align a text, then we want to use that reference point, so the right side of the text. The final aspect about texts in A-frame, and again, this is one of the things about text in A-frame that is really not well documented. So some of the times we will actually have to have an approach of kind of trial and error. we'll have to try changing attributes and see the result. Because the documentation is really not clear, it's really not complete about this. Because actually by inspecting the text object, we see that the default width for a text primitive is 5 meters. And this is really not documented, and it's really not explained anywhere. But so we can change the default size of text to make a piece of text appear larger or smaller. I make it appear as it is closer or farther away from the user. And so to control that, the width of the text, we just use the width attribute that we have used on other primitives. The thing with text is that it's actually very, first of all, it's not very intuitive what it means. So we are really not used to specifying the size of text by saying how large the width of the text is. If you're used to HTML or any other pagination software, design software, we usually define the font size, not exactly the width of the text in meters or other units. So it may not be a very intuitive, at least to me, it's not very intuitive way of sizing text, but it's how it works in A-frame. Another thing to notice is that the exact size of a line of text in A-frame is actually impossible to set. Because A-frame will automatically adjust and in some cases add white space at the end of the line. So it's really, for sizing text, I really recommend that you try different values and see the result, the preview, and see if it fits the rest of the scene. It's kind of the trial and error. But so, for example, in this example, we have text positioned just before a black surface, and we have set different sizes for these three pieces of text. I'm going to show you the source. So the background of the text, as you see here, is actually a box. We could have used the plane, bidimensional plane, but I just used the box. Just to make sure that the text has some contrast behind it. And then the first piece of text, we are actually just using the default size. So we don't set the width. We just set the position to make sure that it's at the top of the box. And then on the middle one, we are specifying a width of 2.5 meters. And on the last one, we are specifying a width of 5 meters. This is just a way of, for me to show you that the default width is actually 5, which is not documented anywhere. So we can see in the example that the first and last are actually exactly the same. So the default width is 5 meters, but you will also notice that 5 meters is actually the width of the box. And you see in the example that the default, or even the third piece of text with an explicit width of 5, it doesn't cover the whole width of the box, because A-frame broke the line, and so actually the text ends before it reaches the 5 meters in width. So that's why I was saying it's actually impossible or almost impossible to precisely set the width of a given line of text. And in the middle text here, it has a width of 2.5, so it should be half the width of the box. But again, it's not, it doesn't quite reach half the width of the box.